Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, managing editor of Shadowproof, and I'm here for a quick end of week update on some of the journalism that we've been publishing at Shadowproof over the past week. And I'll also conclude with some thoughts on the Democratic National Convention, as I wrote a piece that was published to Medium about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party establishment. So if you go to Shadowproof, we have this excellent report that was contributed from Rainier Harris, and he's a senior at Regis High School and a Queens native in New York, a young journalist. He's actually been published by local press there, the City and State New York, Curb New York, YR Media, the 74, City Limits, and Gothamist. He's already an up-and-coming journalist and a young Black journalist, and we're very pleased to have been able to publish his work as part of the reporting we're doing to expand people's thinking about policing and prisons. We've been engaging in this conversation about abolition and dismantling the prison industrial complex, dismantling and defunding police departments throughout the country, and seeking restorative justice and alternatives. And he spoke to students in schools about their experiences with the police. And in this case, this would be the New York Police Department, who would be their school resource officers, and found that they're very conflicted. They have their own abusive experiences with the police, but they also have a very limited frame of understanding as to what kind of things could be done to provide security. They've seen where they have threats in schools and something has to be done to prevent weapons from being used against other kids. Students might want to start fights. And so this article explores the feelings that students have and then tries to expand the way that we might address what is going on in terms of violence in schools. And Rainier wrote an excellent piece digging into this issue. I highly recommend that you go read over at Shadowproof. It is called "Students Victimized by Police Are Conflicted Over NYPD Presence in Their Schools." And this is part of our reporting on organizing around Black lives, police abolition. We put out an open call. So if you're a journalist or a writer, and you don't have to be a professional, if this is work that you do and you want to pitch us, we encourage you to send pitches to editor@shadowproof.com. We'll work with you. There are many contributions that we receive, and we'll go through them. And if we find stories that we like, we'll get back to you and green light so that we can publish to Shadowproof. But we've asked for some specific kinds of stories to continue this work. First off, we would like perspectives on looting from abolitionist organizers and people who live in communities impacted by policing. There's exploring how different groups are dealing with the fact that there is this narrative that has been developing in communities that this looting might be one of the few ways that the people in power actually take notice and engage in action to help vulnerable people. And what is that doing to the constructive organizing that is happening versus the destruction that is happening? And how are organizers, or how are people who are community residents navigating this bleak reality that people are turning to these desperate acts to get politicians or elites to move? There's the attempted co-optation of the Black Lives Matter, that the movement that we'd like to explore. We've seen politicians, corporations, and other nonprofit groups quickly glom on to this and use abolition language and frame this as that saying that they're on board with these struggles. What are they really? How is this being manipulated by corporate boardrooms, etc., in order to renew their ability to get us to allow them to be part of our world without us protesting them daily? Are they just trying to burnish their image by supporting the Black Lives Matter movement? And that's something we want to see journalists and writers explore with examples. If there are grassroots candidates that are out there who have made defunding police or dismantling the prison industrial complex, or if they've embraced broader principles of abolition as a central part of their election campaigns, we're interested in these, especially those at the city and county level. We'd like to publish this kind of reporting so we can further expand the conversation around what we're pushing toward. It can't just be that we institute police reforms that have been on the table for the last 5, if not the past 10 years. We know that this movement goes all the way back to Mike Brown, particularly when he was murdered by Darren Wilson in Ferguson, Missouri. We know there's many, many more individuals' names we could throw out there who were killed by the police, who were sparks for a movement. And Eric Garner influenced the adoption of no chokehold policies. So we've already had police departments take up these things, and yet it didn't meaningfully change policing in this country. And so we're doing this reporting to further pressure and support groups that are working for these things that are important when it comes to doing away with police, rolling it back and having less police in the communities. So Michael Sayanato is a labor journalist who is constantly doing exceptional work. He had pieces that were at The Guardian this past week. I'd encourage you to go read. But at our site, we published a report from him called Bangladesh Clothing Factory Workers Face Layoffs as Retail Corporations Cancel Orders During Pandemic. And this is yet another very well written piece where he talks to workers, shares what they're going through, and orders have been canceled due to the pandemic. It's impacted over 2 million workers. He shares what they're going through in this report. It's absolutely essential. And if we're going to have worker solidarity here in the US, we should also have global solidarity. We should know what the effect is on everyone due to globalization. Let's not just concern ourselves with the neoliberalism in our country, but let's also be concerned about what global capitalism does to the underclass and the poor in countries worldwide that are being exploited. And Michael brings a critical dimension to Shadowproof with this story that we don't usually have, which is global coverage of workers. And so I would like to conclude by discussing or just briefly highlighting some thoughts about the Democratic National Convention that recently concluded, and to say that we saw that with the Democrats, they are putting on they're including Republicans in their campaign. They are turning to warmongers. We had 90 former military and intelligence officials that signed on to a letter that outlined why they can't support Trump, and they think Joe Biden's going to be a more effective commander-in-chief. We have an example of a Biden confidant saying that there's going to be austerity come Biden's election because there's been tax cuts for the rich and for corporations, so we may not have money for expanding social programs. This is deficit hawk rhetoric. We have also an example, a very pernicious example, of the Biden campaign embracing right-wing smears against a activist named Linda Sarsour, who's been consistently targeted by these groups that believe that Islam is on the march and is coming for Americans, and they're hate-filled. And so this campaign embraced it because she supports the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel, and she's for ending the occupation of Palestine. But she's also someone who has committed herself to mobilizing Muslim and Arab activists to help Biden defeat Trump in November. So she doesn't deserve this kind of treatment, but they're pushing her away. She was part of a video about getting out the vote in Muslim communities, and that was seized upon by the right wing And then the Biden campaign distanced themselves from her inclusion in the DNC. They didn't distance themselves from Colin Powell being included in the DNC, even though he lied to bring us into a war. There's no distancing from Meg Whitman or Christine Todd Whitman, who lied about the air quality in New York after 9/11. There's no distancing from John Kasich, who the Democratic Party had personally condemned previously for his anti-women views when it comes to abortion, and for the fact that he's been against expanding programs to help workers. And so it shows you where the priorities lie. And I think they're making a choice. They're deciding that they're going to depend and rely on Republicans in order to beat Donald Trump. They're counting on our fear. They think they can hold us captive. They're giving us breadcrumbs for support. They're giving us breadcrumbs, asking for our support, and they're expecting us to show up and vote on election day, and we aren't going to get anything in return, but they figure that we don't want another term of Donald Trump and we should just have it this way. It's what happens every 4 years in this country, and we've seen that cyclically this has been the madness when it comes to John Kerry in 2004. It was the madness with Al Gore. You could include Walter Mondale and Michael Dukakis, and this is the way that they have chosen to operate the Democratic Party. So it does not really represent us. And I think that we all make a private decision going forward that we are going to vote whatever way we want. I advocate for doing whatever to throw Donald Trump out of office. But I don't think that we need to spend our time investing resources and our own energy into helping the Biden campaign beat Trump. I think we should have more dignity until they show more respect to us. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez represents part of the future of politics in the United States, and yet she got 90 seconds on a stage at the DNC. And so they don't understand what they think they can just continue to abuse people in the country and get away with it. And I think a message has to be sent. So people should not debase themselves by making pronouncements about why Joe Biden is better than Donald Trump. Let them do that. Let them mobilize. Essentially, we're being subjected to a war among elites over who's best suited to run the country. And there's a faction that won power back in 2016, and they have coalesced around Donald Trump. And there's a faction who's upset, and they're within national security institutions and in the military, and they see Joe Biden as son. There's divisions on Wall Street and within corporate America, and let them duke it out, and let's see where they come to it. That's not a privileged idea, by the way, because we have groups throughout the country at the grassroots level that have been working to mobilize people and contribute aid to those who need it during the COVID-19 pandemic. I've seen organizing, fighting against rent, fighting against evictions, and also fighting for rent forgiveness. There's been efforts to stand up for homeless people. There's been food drives and collecting water, collecting personal protective equipment, standing up for those in and outside prisons, and sticking up for people who are vulnerable, who have not been released, even though they could contract the coronavirus and die from being trapped in these prison facilities. And so I don't see why we need to be concerned that there aren't going to be people that are going to work to reduce harm under a second administration of Trump or a first administration of Biden. And I think that there are definitely clear differences. And I'm not here to make a case that Biden would be worse than Donald Trump. That's certainly not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that I think we should just let them get there. Let them get there the way that they choose, and then we'll go to work when and if Biden is able to beat Donald Trump, because clearly they think that they've got it all figured out and they don't need us. And so when they're in office and in the White House, they're going to be hostile to the left. We know that. They're going to treat groups the same way that Barack Obama's administration treated the progressive groups, especially when it had come to healthcare. There was effort to get a public option. There was pressure for single-payer healthcare to expand Medicare for all. We're going to see that again with Joe Biden and his administration. Any push for free college, any push to win any kind of social programs is going to be something that they fight. And so let's just not invest all of our time and energy in a campaign that seems to have more in common with George W. Bush and Dick Cheney and Henry Kissinger and the people who run corporations in Silicon Valley than us, the people who are doing the essential work on a daily basis. The working class, the middle class, the people who are keeping the country running during a pandemic. Because the Democratic Party does not care or really want to try and represent our interests. And they showed that by doing everything they could to stop Bernie Sanders from becoming the Democratic Party's nominee. So now they made their choice. They nominated Joe Biden, and then they gave him a veneer of progressivism, or they washed him with the identity of Kamala Harris so that he is more palatable to us to vote for. And now that's the ticket. And they have a coalition of people. The big tent is actually not so big. It stops at like a certain point, not too far from the center of the political spectrum, and anybody too far to the left is expected to shut up and be quiet for the next 2 months. And I don't think we have to acquiesce and submit to that. Any of the K-Hive or any of the Biden boys online who want to engage in conduct that is negative, I think that should be a sick reflection of the Biden campaign and the character of it, in the same way that they constantly threw any single individual user's tweets at us and said that was representative of Bernie Sanders' campaign. This is a game, and so let's play it. And I think ultimately not spending time investing our energy and resources in the Biden campaign over the next 2 months is going to pay off, because we'll be ready for whatever election outcome occurs in November, and we'll just crank up the machine and get to work organizing for policies and doing what we need to do to protect. There'll be work that has to be done during the lame duck. If Donald Trump is not going to have a second term, we'll need to be able to mobilize. So there's policies and certain things that we want to protect are not entirely rolled back. We'll have to keep up the pressure and make sure Joe Biden restores anything that is destroyed by Donald Trump or has been destroyed in the past. There's so many environmental regulations that need to be put back in place that have been unraveled. There's a lot that we need to do. And I think that the time now is to prepare for that moment, given whatever outcome we see with the election in November. And so that does it for my commentary about the Democrats. I want to thank you all for your continued support. We have a weekly show called the Dissenter Weekly that we do episodes every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern, and then those are archived and you could watch. There's a Dissenter newsletter that I curate on whistleblowers where you can subscribe at dissenter.substack.com/subscribe. There are 30-day free trials right now if you sign up. This is part of our 5th year birthday celebration. We celebrated the 5th year of us. So if you want to support that newsletter, you can sign up for it. It'll help fund our freelance journalism. And I'm seeing a comment on YouTube encouraging us to set up a super chat anytime we live stream. Thank you for the recommendation. Appreciate you watching. And so we'll be back next week. I'll have another update on Shadowproof, but just to thank you all for reading the work that we do at Shadowproof and for sharing it. And we'll continue to create the space that people can have during the presidential election so that they don't have to subject themselves to what is going on. They don't have to exist within these confines of what the establishment is demanding. It's going to get intense over the next 2 months. And anyone can be accused of helping Donald Trump win in November. I'm sure that what I wrote, if you go to Medium, I wrote this commentary very similar to what I just said about the DNC. And I put it down there, and then I was doing some riffing here in this update. And anybody who sees that, who is insecure about democracy, is going to suggest that I'm helping Trump win, and that we can't have this open conversation where we speak realistically about the ticket that the Democratic Party is pushing on all of us. And I absolutely understand the threat, the rising threat of fascism if Trump gets a second term. But I also think that if the Democrats want to play this game, then we should just sit on the sidelines, and I'll show up to vote in November. I'll mail in my ballot, but I'm not going to be out there mobilizing people and hyping the Biden-Harris campaign in ways that are disingenuous and don't actually represent what those candidates' records are and who they likely will be if they're in the White House. So if they're banking on anti-Trumpism being enough to catapult them to victory in November, let's see. And if their coalition of disaffected Republicans is the way they think they're going to win in November, let's see. And if that fails, I'll be ready right away to tell them that they repeated the same mistakes that they made back in 2016, and they miscalculated. And it proves yet again that the future of challenging the rising tide of fascism in this country are these campaigns that are throwing out Democratic incumbents like Cori Bush, the election of Jamel Bowman. We have Alex Morse that is running in against Richard Neal, this 30-year incumbent who is such a friend of Wall Street. We have Ilhan Omar. We have Rashida Tlaib. We've got all these people who, to me, represent a progressive version of politics that is much closer to the left-wing politics that I am in favor of supporting and seeing the Democratic Party stand for. It's more humane. It embraces social, economic, racial, and environmental justice. And this is the energy. This is where the youth are at. It involves policy and not superficial personality bullshit. And so that is where we need to keep dragging the elites, but we probably can't do it within the framework of presidential politics. We might be able to do it within congressional races during the next few months in this country, but it's impossible. We don't have adults who are hosts of MSNBC and CNN. We don't have people who think that you can vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and at the same time say the truth about who they are and what they represent and what it represents that the DNC cough them out and are forcing us to see them as some kind of alternative to Trump when they're very meek, weak, and debatable alternative, not a very meaningful alternative to Trumpism at all. And so don't get it confused. I am not telling anyone how to vote at all. I'm not shaming anyone. If you decide to vote third party, that's good. If you decide to vote Joe Biden, that's fine. I don't want you to vote for Donald Trump. But if you don't want to vote at all and leave the presidential box blank after what you witnessed these past 4 days at the DNC, I think that's perfectly fine as well. My commentary is solely about how we're going to let anything that we've seen over the last 4 days control the way in which we organize around issues and cover critical developments in our country. And so, again, I thank you for watching this update. I imagine that these should be brief, but at a convention is really hugely important, and I didn't write anything throughout the week. So this sort of covers all the commentary. And I'm taking a week off with unauthorized disclosure. So there's no real-time commentary about the DNC coming from Rana Kalik and myself this past week. She's taking a break, and I'm taking a bit of a break. So anyways, until next week, I'll thank you for your support of Shadowproof, and we'll be back next week with another update.